Have you ever thought about who the most powerful dark wizard in the Harry Potter universe really is? What if Voldemort isn't the ultimate villain we've all believed him to be? In today's video, you'll find out why Gellert Grindelwald might actually be the greatest dark wizard of all time, and why Voldemort pales in comparison. For years, I was convinced that Voldemort was the most terrifying, unstoppable, and dangerous wizard in the wizarding world. He seemed invincible, striking fear into the hearts of everyone. His presence alone sent shivers down spines. I even declared him the greatest dark wizard in one of my previous articles. But then something changed. A comment made me question everything. Someone suggested that Grindelwald, not Voldemort, deserved that title. At first, I dismissed it, but the more I read about Grindelwald, the more I compared his history to Voldemort's, the more I began to doubt my original stance. And now, I've come to a shocking realization. Grindelwald wasn't just as powerful as Voldemort. He was stronger, smarter, far more dangerous, and I'm about to prove it. Before we dive in, just a quick disclaimer. This is my personal opinion. If you disagree, feel free to debate in the comments. Now let's get started. Voldemort was fueled by hatred toward his father, his mother, his teachers, muggles, muggleborns, and basically anyone who wasn't bowing to him. His fear of death defined his entire existence. That fear led him to create Horcruxes, desperately trying to cheat fate. His followers weren't loyal out of admiration. They served him out of terror. Even his closest allies, like the Malfoys and Peter Pettigrew, feared him more than they respected him. At his core, Voldemort was a frightened, bitter child lashing out at the world. Grindelwald? He was different. He had vision. He wasn't just seeking power. He wanted to reshape the world. He believed in his own superiority and sought the Deathly Hallows to cement his dominance. Unlike Voldemort, he didn't force followers into submission. People followed him because they were captivated by his charisma, his ideals. He even managed to sway young Dumbledore, something Voldemort could never dream of. And unlike Voldemort, Grindelwald had regrets. In the end, he faced his own failures, acknowledged his crimes. That alone makes him a far more complex and compelling figure. Now let's talk about their impact. Voldemort started 2 wars. His reign of terror was brutal, but it was limited. He never dared to expand beyond Britain. Despite all his power, he remained a local villain. Grindelwald? He ignited a war that spread across Europe and even reached America. He wasn't just a threat to the UK, he was a global nightmare. His followers weren't just terrorizing wizards in one country. They were shaking the foundations of the entire wizarding world. His goal? The creation of a magical empire, a vision far grander than Voldemort's personal vendettas. He even built his own prison, Nurmengard, a fortress meant to hold his enemies. Ironic, considering it became his own final resting place. Now let's compare their magical abilities. Voldemort was undeniably skilled. He excelled in the dark arts from a young age, mastered Horcruxes, and even learned to fly without a broom. He was a formidable duelist, taking on some of the best wizards of his time. His battle with Dumbledore at the Ministry was intense, though it's worth noting that Dumbledore was already weakened at that point. Grindelwald, however, was a true prodigy. From his youth, he displayed extraordinary magical talent, quickly becoming one of Durmstrang's top students. His combat skills were unmatched. He defeated Aberforth Dumbledore, overpowered American auras, and mastered wandless magic. He fought entire squads of wizards and won. And let's not forget his duel with Dumbledore. Many call it the greatest wizarding battle in history. Unlike Voldemort's fight with a weakened Dumbledore, Grindelwald faced Albus at his peak, and he nearly won. That alone speaks volumes.
So who truly stands above?
Voldemort was feared. Grindelwald was revered. Voldemort ruled through fear. Grindelwald ruled through ideology. Voldemort's ambitions were personal. Grindelwald sought to change the world. In the end, there's no contest. Grindelwald wasn't just a dark wizard, he was a force of nature, a villain whose shadow loomed far beyond Voldemort's reach. Have you ever thought about what truly makes a dark wizard powerful? What if it's not just about raw, magical ability, but something deeper, something that makes them unforgettable? In today's video, you'll find out why Grindelwald wasn't just stronger than Voldemort. He was on an entirely different level. Voldemort had an obsession with power, but his power was built on fear. People followed him because they had no choice. He ruled through intimidation, demanding loyalty through threats and punishment. Even his closest Death Eaters were terrified of him. He had no real allies, only servants too scared to betray him. Grindelwald was different. He didn't just crave power, he inspired. He made people believe in his vision. They didn't just follow him out of fear, they followed him because they wanted to. That's the difference between a tyrant and a true leader. Voldemort hid in the shadows, waiting for his moment to strike. He manipulated, schemed, and killed, but he always worked in secrecy. Even at his strongest, he never fully stepped into the light. He let his followers do the dirty work while he remained a figure of mystery. Grindelwald had no such fear. He stood in the open, unafraid of the world. He gave speeches, he showed his face. He wanted the wizarding world to know him, to hear his words, to understand why his rule was inevitable. He was charismatic, persuasive, and dangerously intelligent. That's why he gained so many followers so quickly. He didn't just have an army, he had a movement. Look at how the world reacted to them. Voldemort's return was met with denial. People didn't want to believe he was back. The Ministry tried to cover it up, to pretend he wasn't a real threat. Even when he was at full power, he was more of a whispered fear than an acknowledged force. Grindelwald, on the other hand, was impossible to ignore. The entire wizarding world knew who he was. His influence stretched far beyond Britain. The American Ministry of Magic had to intervene to stop him. He wasn't just a local menace. He was an international crisis. He wasn't just feared, he was respected. Now let's talk about their relationships. Voldemort was incapable of love. He never had a real connection with anyone. He saw everyone as a tool. His followers were disposable. If they failed him, he killed them. If they showed weakness, he punished them. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, his most devoted worshipper, was nothing more than an asset to him. He had no friends, no allies, no equals. Grindelwald had Dumbledore. That alone sets him apart. Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of all time, was once his friend, more than a friend. Their bond was deep, built on mutual admiration and shared ideals. For a brief moment, they saw the world the same way. Dumbledore, a man who could see through almost anyone, was captivated by him. That speaks volumes. Even after their friendship ended, there was still a connection between them. Grindelwald's influence never truly left Dumbledore. He haunted him for years. He shaped the man who would later become Voldemort's greatest enemy. Voldemort had no such effect on people. He left behind destruction, but not legacy. No one missed him when he was gone. No one mourned him. He was a nightmare people wanted to forget. Grindelwald, even in defeat, left an imprint on history. And let's not forget how they met their ends. Voldemort died a pathetic death. No grand finale, no last words, just fear and confusion as his own spell backfired. His body hit the floor, lifeless and empty. The Dark Lord, who had terrorized Britain for years, was gone in an instant, reduced to nothing. Grindelwald's end was different. He was captured, imprisoned, left to rot in the very prison he had built for his enemies, and yet he remained defiant. When Voldemort came for him, desperate to find the Elder Wand, Grindelwald didn't cower. He laughed in his face. He mocked him. Even without a wand, even in his weakest moment, he still had control over the situation. He still had power. Voldemort killed him in anger, not because he had to, but because Grindelwald refused to fear him. That, in the end, was the ultimate proof of who was truly stronger.
Let's go even deeper.
Voldemort's ideology was flawed from the start. He wanted to eliminate Muggle-borns, to rule over the wizarding world with pure blood supremacy. But his entire premise was hypocritical. He himself was a half-blood. His hatred for Muggles was rooted in personal trauma, not in any real philosophy. He wasn't leading a revolution. He was just acting out his own pain. Grindelwald's vision, as twisted as it was, had logic behind it. He didn't just want power. He wanted to reshape the world. He saw the weaknesses in wizarding society, the way they hid from Muggles, the way they limited themselves. He wanted to change that. He believed in a future where wizards ruled openly, not in secrecy. His ideology was dangerous, but it was well thought out. That's why people followed him. That's why he built a movement. And let's be honest, if Grindelwald had the same resources Voldemort had, the story would have ended very differently. Voldemort had the Death Eaters. He had influence over the Ministry. He had control over Hogwarts. He had the backing of pureblood families with immense wealth and power. He had everything he needed to win. And yet he lost. Grindelwald had far fewer advantages. He didn't have a prophecy protecting Harry Potter. He didn't have a Horcrux weakness that could be exploited. And yet he nearly succeeded in taking over the wizarding world. Imagine if their roles were reversed. If Grindelwald had been the one in Voldemort's place, with the Death Eaters at his command, with full control over Britain's magical government, he wouldn't have made the same mistakes. He wouldn't have underestimated love, friendship, or the power of unity. He wouldn't have split his soul into fragile objects that could be destroyed.
He would have won.
That's the ultimate difference. Voldemort had power, but he never truly understood it. Grindelwald did. He knew how to use it, how to wield influence, how to turn people to his side. He didn't need a prophecy to shape destiny. He made his own. That's why, at the end of the day, Grindelwald was the real Dark Lord, the one who should be feared, the one whose legacy will never fade. And that's why Voldemort, for all his cruelty, was never really the greatest. He was just a shadow of what Grindelwald once was.